Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and I am back, of course, from CES, and one of the more frequent comments I got on my coverage this year was how many of these products are going to be around in a year or two, if not a decade later. Well, we're going to take a look in this video at the ghosts of CES 2015, a little spooky look back here on some things that I found at the show 10 years ago. The very first CES I attended was the 2015 show. And a lot of this stuff didn't make it, but a couple of things did. So why don't we take a look and see what I found back then and where those products are now. Now this video, as always, is being brought to you by all of you. That includes everyone who watches this channel on a regular basis and subscribes, along with those of you who have contributed to the channel, either through my donor box page at Lon.TV/support or through the YouTube membership program, Patreon, or Floatplane. We also still have plenty of merch, an unlimited supply of it actually, that you can pick up in the links down below in the video description. But now, why don't we take a look back at 2015. I was 10 years younger then, and if you are in your 30s and want to see what happens after 10 years, look at this guy now. It goes quick, let me tell you. But the first product I want to focus on here is the ODG Consumer Smart Glasses. These were a first attempt at an augmented reality headset that you could wear that would allow you to basically have an Android device that would overlay itself onto what you were seeing. It was a very cool product for the time. This company, ODG, got a lot of attention at the show, and if you look at my view count down there, I had 76,000 views on this interview that I did with somebody from their company. And this was the single biggest view count that I got from the show that year. And what's amazing is that year after year at CES, I see so much attention going to these companies making AR or VR products, but the consumers never respond to it. And that is exactly what happened with ODG. They collapsed a couple of years later. And by 2018, half the workforce was laid off and the other half were not getting paid. So they did sell off their patents to a few other companies, including Facebook, but basically the company went defunct not long after that 2015 show. All right, next up we have the Typo keyboards. Now this is an interesting story because back in 2015, BlackBerry was still around. They were hanging on by a thread, and Typo came up with a keyboard for your iPhone that felt very similar to the BlackBerry experience. So similar that BlackBerry sued Typo and won, and basically Typo had to get out of the smartphone keyboard business. So what they did instead is they introduced tablet keyboards for the iPads, the iPad mini and the bigger iPads here, and I still have these. They actually sent them to me after the show to review. Unfortunately, the company did not last much longer. I don't think these ever shipped. In fact, this one looks like a prototype, and I had no place to send these back to, so I've just hung on to them over the years here. And what attracted me to the iPad mini keyboard here is that they managed to squeeze full-size keys into this. It is a little bit squished in that you have to get used to the key placement, but it was nice to see them trying something. And the quality of the product actually felt very nice. They are getting sticky now. They've got that rubberized coating that is coming off, but overall these were really nicely constructed keyboards, but unfortunately without the mobile phone keyboard, they didn't have enough capital to make this product successful, and the company later went defunct. Now next up is BMW. Now of course they are still around. And at the show in 2015, they were demoing some autonomous driving features. And this was the first time I got into a car that could drive itself. It didn't go very far. It maybe went a couple hundred feet, but it basically wrapped around a little course that they made for it there. And this video also did very well, getting over 28,000 views, most of them coming during the week of the show. And it just shows you how fast technology moves, because of course now you can get into a number of vehicles and have them drive you all over the place. But back then, this was a very novel concept, and it was only 10 years ago. So it gives you a real good sense as to just how fast developments happen here in the tech world. Of note, though, I was talking to one of the BMW executives while we were waiting for our turn to get into the car, and I said, hey, this is a stock vehicle. Why aren't all your cars just doing this out in the field? And he goes, we don't want to be the first ones out of the gate with this, because God forbid somebody runs into somebody or an accident occurs. We don't want that liability or attention. So they had the ability to do this, but they just didn't release the feature out to consumers because of that fear. And then, of course, a little bit later that year, in around October or so, Tesla introduced Autopilot that was essentially doing the same thing this BMW was, because the early days of Autopilot were making use of the radars and some of the limited cameras and the sonar features that these cars had to do that automated driving. So they waited around a little bit too long, perhaps, and Tesla kind of beat them out of the gate with that, with at least making it consumer-facing. And now, of course, our cars do this quite a bit now. Now, another company that's still around today is Razer, but their product called the Razer Forge didn't last all that long. So around the time of the 2015 show, there was a real effort to come up with Android-powered game consoles. And Razer was out there with their product. Mad Catz had the Mojo that was out there. We also had the Ouya, which had come out just shortly before the 2015 show, that was a crowd-funded Android-based gaming device. And Razer was hoping to pick up on some of that market share, and they were encouraging some developers to produce software for it too. Unfortunately, it didn't do very well. When it finally did come out, I reviewed it and I called it a dud, especially because the NVIDIA Shield had come out at that time and was much more powerful and much more capable of doing things beyond just gaming. And we all know how things went from there for these Android-based game consoles. So it was short-lived, but Razer tried really, really hard. In fact, when Ouya was going out of business, Razer bought all of their assets and actually started getting the Ouya operating system to run on the Razer devices. So they were making a real effort here, but unfortunately, consumers just did not respond to it. Now, Kickstarter was a very popular mechanism for startups to try to get their products out to market, and we covered two failed ones that we didn't know were failing at the time, both of them involving aerial devices. The first was this one called the Carbon Flyer, and what they were developing was a paper airplane looking device that was actually made out of carbon fiber, and you could control it with an app on your phone. This one went up on Indiegogo. I did put some money in towards it, and unfortunately I never saw the product and I never got my money back. They were able to finally ship a few units out like 5 years later or 6 years later, but they only managed to do about a couple hundred of them before everything went defunct. And if you go to their Indiegogo page, you can see that there was a lot of unhappy customers who never got anything, and the company either squandered all their money or kept it. So unfortunately, the Carbon Flyer, which we covered at the show, did not come to fruition. Another one, which was actually a much bigger scandal, was the Zano Drone. And this was a small handheld drone, and they raised $3.4 million on Kickstarter. Now, I later learned the guy that I was interviewing there had put in a substantial amount of money, I think 75,000 British pounds, into the company, and he became part of the company essentially with that investment. And the product that he had on the floor was a non-functional mock-up. There was nothing flying there at all. And they had come up with all these stretch goals for their campaign. And as they kept raising more and more money, they kept meeting all those stretch goals. And it got to the point where they could not meet the expectations of customers, and the company went out of business, and they only shipped a very small number of drones. And unfortunately, a lot of those drones came to people who pre-ordered it and not to the Kickstarter backers. It got to be such a big deal that Kickstarter actually hired and commissioned a reporter to go out and do a piece of investigative journalism about what happened. And he wrote a very lengthy article that is still up on Medium. You can find it at Lon.TV/Zano Aftermath. And what the reporter found was that there was good intentions here, but they just could not execute. The company was not prepared to execute what they did. Their past products were never really all that successful. And what ended up happening here is that they just got too big for their britches, and that was the end of it. And so $3.4 million out the door, a couple $100 of mine out the door as well, and I never saw the product come to fruition. After that year, I decided to be very careful about covering Kickstarter campaigns, because many of them were not getting to the point where there was an actual product at the end of it. So nowadays, I look for a company that has a track record before I start talking about one of their crowdfunding projects, because I got burned on a lot of these, and I'm sure a lot of you did too. But not all of the Kickstarter products at the show were unsuccessful. Pono Player, which was from musician Neil Young, had raised over $6 million, and they had the product shipping by the time CES 2015 rolled around. This was a lossless audio player that had some high quality digital to analog converters on board, and it was designed for enthusiasts to enjoy high quality lossless music with wired headphones. They had a music store that went along with it, and I think their plan was to have the music store be the driver of revenue for this company. Unfortunately, about 2 years later, Neil Young killed off the music player and the store. In fact, the store went down about a year before the company went defunct, and he cited the record labels as the reason why he had to shut down the whole thing. Even after, though, the product went away, you could still load music onto it manually. So it wasn't a bricked product or a piece of e-waste, but it's something that no longer exists. And I don't know if any of you have one, but I'd love to hear what you thought of the Pono Player. It didn't look all that portable. It was a rather large triangular kind of device, but it was an attempt to get people to appreciate lossless music. And of course, you can now buy lossless audio from a number of providers, including Apple. Now, next up, we have the Virtuix Omni VR Treadmill. And back in 2015, the Oculus and the HTC Vive were very much anticipated products. They hadn't yet been released at the time of the show. And this company, Virtuix, was trying to get ahead of the game with a treadmill that you could use for your VR environments. And they had a guy demoing it here. This booth, as you can imagine, got a lot of attention. And as I was going through some of the videos from 2015, I said, there is no way this thing is still around. But guess what? It is. You can go to their website right now and buy one for a whopping $3,500. So they do cost a bit more than they were supposed to cost back in 2015, which was under $1,000. But they are still here. And I can't believe it that they're able to keep this company going as long as they have with this thing, but they did. I think they were rather smart about it because what they also came up with were these arena locations where you could go in and have some friends join you for some VR arena activities where you all get into one of these things and pay by the hour. So they found a business model that works for them, and kudos to that, right? So they're charging probably what this thing costs to make and then making some ongoing revenue with these fun arenas that are always good for birthday parties and whatever. And they've got these things all over the country. Surprisingly, they don't have anything in New York City. The closest one to me is New Jersey and Massachusetts. But they do have multiple locations throughout the world here, and they managed to make this product work, and they've kept the company alive for a decade. How about that? So you never know what is going to be successful at CES. And maybe in a few years we'll come back and look at all the stuff I looked at this past year. And now that we're in this phase where I can look back 10 years every time I go to CES, maybe next year we'll take a look and see how things did from the show back in 2020 or 2016 when we get to that point. Now, if you want to watch all this old CES stuff, you can at Lon.TV/CES 2015. I was still trying to figure out the process of covering a show like this. So back then, I went out and did basically a separate video for each booth that I visited. And over the years, I've refined things to the point now where I think I've got it down to what the viewers are looking for, at least from me, where we do a dispatch video once a day on the show floor. By the way, the sponsor that we had in 2015 was this low-cost tablet maker called Excel. They were making these like $50 Android tablets back then. They're not around anymore either. So a lot of things can change in technology, but sometimes you might get surprised. So that'll do it for the Ghosts of CES 2015. Let me know what you thought down in the comment section, and I'll be back with some regular scheduled programming here with some product reviews coming up later in the week. Until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.